His name is Sylvester Stallone. He's the star of a new film called Rocky. He has been described as handsome, tough, talented, sexy, sensitive, dynamic, and brilliant. He's been compared to Brando, Newman, Pacino, and De Niro. He's been called a top contender for an Academy Award. Sylvester Stallone in Rocky, rated PG.
Duan, we are back together again. I am Double G alongside Duan. We did the Fabulous Four podcast many moons ago. That is out there on our YouTube channel for anybody who wants to listen to that. But we are back with a new project going over all of the 8 films in the Rocky saga, starting with film 1, which we will talk about here in this episode. This episode is called Going the Distance. That is the theme of the episode. But before we dig into this project, and we can give a little bit of an introduction on why we decided to do it. How are you doing? It's been a little while since we've talked, and that project, the Fabulous Four, seems like it was like so many years ago now.
Yeah, like a lot's gone on since then, but you know, this is quite a different project from what we've done previously. What we've always done on this site in the past has always been very sports focused, and you know, this is more of going to be like a film club project. You know, and while these films are influenced by the sport of boxing, you know, I think also over the years, over recent years, they've played a big part in influencing the sport of boxing a lot too. You know, in 2010, Sylvester Stallone was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame for creating the Rocky character, and you know, that was kind of, there was mixed views on that, as there always is when you induct an actor into Sports Hall of Fame. But for me, when you really look at the goodwill and influence these films have had on the boxing world, it's like a no-brainer. It absolutely belongs there. You know, you think of how many boxers and fans were brought into the sport because of these films. You think of how many fights have been built around the Rocky story, and you know, every time a new film in this series comes out, there's just that little bit of extra interest in the boxing world than there was previously. And you know, that all of course started with the film we're going to talk about now, which is the original 1976 Rocky. And you know, in some ways this is a totally different film than all the ones that would follow in the series. I think it's a lot more low-key in a lot of ways, but when you think about the Rocky films, you think about certain key scenes, you think about the training montage, you think about the music, you think about running the steps, you think about the special way they do the fights that can only be done in Rocky. And you know, all of that starts with this.
Absolutely. And you know, what you said about Stallone's influence with this series is, you know, how many boxing fans were created because of this movie and who then had an interest in the sport afterwards. Now, Stallone himself has a great knowledge of boxing history. Like, he can name all of these old fighters and where he took things from. And, you know, his idea for the character of Rocky, I'm sure the name comes from Rocky Marciano, right? So just his own historic take on the sport is he's very knowledgeable. Now, add to the influence. And yeah, you know, if there is a celebrity wing of the Boxing Hall of Fame or something, or, you know, however they decided to add him, you know, he's very much deserving because of the influence. And, you know, going through eight films, which we will talk about, plus an epilogue to end our series. You know, there's so much, you know, he's adding fighters. He uses actual fighters in his movies. You know, for this one, there's the Joe Frazier cameo,
and also just to chime in there, the person who was initially going to play Apollo Creed was, of course, Kenny Norton, one of Muhammad Ali's great opponents. I think Norton had other plans, and he didn't end up going ahead. And I think also Fraser may have been tried out for that role as well before he landed in his kind of cameo role that he had. So, there has been a tie to the boxing world right from the beginning to the most recent films.
Okay, so why are we doing this? I had this idea about 2 years ago. This was actually before the second Creed came out. And I wanted to do podcasts about all of the first 7 films as kind of a way to, just get excited for Creed 2. Didn't happen. I didn't have the time that I thought I needed to do it, and so I kind of put it on the back burner. And our buddy Big D, he was kind of interested in doing it, and we were kind of trying to figure out how we could tie up our schedules. And I was like, it's just not going to work. I was really bummed out, but during this interesting time that we are living in currently with the pandemic situation, I thought, look, we might have actually a little bit more time to do this. And so then I asked you if you would like to do another project. You were down. This is something that is very near and dear to our hearts. And so that's why it is a good time to put this out. So I hope that people enjoy the project. These are going to be pretty in-depth stuff. But look, like you said, our normal way of doing podcasts is a little bit differently. So there's going to be some structure and some order in these. We will take you through categories. Now, there are tons of movie podcasts that do this, so I'm not reinventing the wheel in any way. I am probably taking a little bit of influence from something like Bill Simmons's Rewatchables podcast, which I enjoy. And look, this is going to be fun. In some instances, there will be some serious stuff, but we are just fans of this franchise, and we are going to dig deep into the movies 1 through 8, including the Creed films. And so this is the first one, Rocky Going the Distance. Okay, so our first category, or our first subject of the show, is going to be to break down the general story of the movies. Some of the stories are fairly simplistic. Some of them are a little bit nonsensical, but for this one, like you said, the original, it is sort of a simple story, but there are so many layers to the story. And I know Stallone himself doesn't consider it to be necessarily biographical, but there are tons of things with the character that relate very much to where he was in his life at this time. And we'll dig through that a little bit later as we go through sort of like a facts, researching old facts on the internet kind of segment. But so here's the story. Everyone knows, most people know this story. You have a classic underdog. He's a leg breaker for a loan shark named Gazzo. He fights on the side because A, I think he feels that he's pretty good at it, and B, it also makes him some money as well. And throughout the early part of the movie, it looks like his fight career is, he's sort of just a weekend fighter. Sort of like if you're a sports person, if you like to play sports, the weekend warrior. And he goes to his gym, Mickey's gym, and his locker has been taken by an up-and-coming prospect named Dipper. He's had this locker for 6 years, very frustrated. Mick, when he asks him, Mick basically said that, you could have been something, and instead you decided to break legs for a loan shark. And so on the other side, there's a side story, which is him trying to date one of his friends, Paulie's sister, Adrian. And so he is constantly going to her job, her pet shop, and he is trying to charm her very unsuccessfully because she is very shy, and they both are an odd pairing. But eventually he talks Paulie into hooking him up with his sister, which is a very memorable scene in which they have Thanksgiving dinner. And Paulie does not tell Adrian that Rocky is coming, so it makes it very uncomfortable for both parties. But they end up going out on a date. They get together, and all of a sudden, Apollo Creed, the heavyweight champion of the world, who is set to fight Mac Lee Green on January 1st, 1976. His opponent, Mac Lee, is hurt. And so they only have, maybe 6 weeks to find a replacement. And instead of looking for contenders, as some of those contenders are also out of it, Miles Juergens, the promoter, and Apollo are looking through a book of local Philadelphia fighters. And Apollo picks out the name, the Italian stallion, Rocky Balboa. His trainer, Tony, a.k.a. Duke, looks at the name and says, look, he's southpaw. We don't mess with southpaws. And Creed's like, nope, don't worry. I'll drop him in 3. So Apollo's looking from the marketing aspect of fighting a Caucasian male, a local Philadelphia fighter, this great charity that Apollo is giving this unknown person a 1 in a million shot. And he is giving this guy an opportunity to fight for the title. So obviously he's not taking it seriously because he has to now market a fight that is on paper a pro wrestling jobber match in a sense. And so on the flip side, Rocky now has the opportunity, which he does not understand how to kind of really take care of. He doesn't have a manager. He doesn't have a training regimen. He's never done this for real. And eventually he has to be okay with Mick, who he was very frustrated with, to train him and to manage him. And so then come the fight, the morning of the fight, he's very positive. He and Adrian are now living together. And he comes to this realization that he cannot win. And you would think, well, you probably should have come to that realization earlier, but part of the whole process for him is, what is driving him is he finally has some people in his corner. Things are finally turning over for him in a positive way. And that is driving him to be his best. But at the end of the day, he's like, look, I am nowhere in this guy's league. I'm not in his class. But if I can go the distance and if I can stand with this guy for 15 rounds, then I can prove to myself that I'm not a bum, that I'm actually somebody. So the metaphor of, proving what he needed to prove to himself, I think just plays with everybody. And then we get the final fight, which is the climax, and we'll talk about that. Is there anything in that summary that I missed that you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, I think, what I think they do such a good job of in this film is, as you said, the film opens cold with Rocky at this kind of low-level club fight, and you instantly from that scene you can kind of tell this is a million miles away from stardom. It's not this is not TV boxing. It's a low level rough fight. You see afterwards he got paid $40 for the night's work or something like that. You see he's not living the life. He's drinking, he's smoking. He's not 100% dedicated to the sport.
He doesn't even have food in his refrigerator.
Yeah, and you're kind of they just give you that instant snapshot, and then they just throughout the story they kind of fill in the little gaps around it while they're just telling their story. You learn when he's talking to Paulie that he's 30 years old. He's not a young kid on the rise anymore. You see at the gym he's lost his locker. They've given it to another up and coming prospect. Then you kind of hear in his blow up with Mickey part of the reason Mickey's frustrated with him is because he's not living living on the right path, and he is hanging out with the wrong sort of crowd, and he's not dedicating himself to sport. And then kind of when he goes out with Adrian, he's telling her about being a southpaw and about how people find southpaws difficult, and that's why he never really felt he never really got his shot, and that's ultimately what the story boils down to. It's about, like, him getting that one opportunity. And, I just think they did a very good job of filling you in on the backstory of this character while telling the story they wanted to tell. That goes right up to the final scene, or right up till he's, going for that, walking to the ring for that fight with Apollo. You hear for the first time his record there, and you hear that he has 20 losses. And, when you hear a boxer with 20 losses, he's in the opposing corner. And he's already said, to Adrian that he doesn't believe he can win this fight. He's there to make up the numbers, but in his view, if he can make the distance with the champion, that will prove something. So, that's kind of all of what this film is about. And, I think they just did a brilliant job telling that story.
Okay, so let's go through some of the scenes that I think stand out. Some of my favorite scenes. And if you have some to add, definitely we'll save those for the end, and then we'll kind of pick what you think and what I think is the best scene in the movie. So I'll kind of go in order of the film, but the beginning of the film is classically slow, and I think part of the reason there's a ton of setting, right? You need to set the place, the time, the situation. I think today you wouldn't make a movie this slow because, the audience of today would get probably pretty bored. So there would be a lot more tighter editing. But in this, in 1976, this is sort of a classic way to utilize time, where the first half of the movie is a little bit slow. The second, but it sets up a second half of the film that just goes by like a blink of an eye. So most of my favorite films are probably, or my favorite scenes are probably more towards the second half of the film. But if some of yours are in the beginning, totally fine. I think the ones that just have always grabbed me in my 35 times of watching this movie were sort of after the middle. So my first scene is so Rocky has already accepted the fight, and he is at the what I assume to be a press conference, but it looks like it's hosted by the Pennsylvania Athletic Commission, and Apollo is in all of his bravado. He is the star of this press conference. Rocky's kind of in the background, and the announcers or the interviewers, they finally bring Rocky in, and Rocky is so uncomfortable, and he's trying to answer these questions, but he's nervous and he doesn't want to look bad. And in his life, it seems like people love to make fun of him, or what he calls cheap shots. And he feels that the media always takes cheap shots at folks. And so he's very worried, but he's trying not to show Adrian and Paulie that he's frustrated by the fact that he is on TV and he is not comfortable. And so after he leaves the house, he's going to go back to his place. And there's a scene where, and this is a classic sort of old school movie scene, where you see Rocky in the foreground and Adrian in the background. And you see very clearly Rocky's face, but Adrian is blurry. And so he goes to Adrian. He says, when I said that those cheap shots or that whole situation didn't bother me. And she's like, yeah. He goes, it did. And once he says it did, he walks away. And then the background becomes really clear, and you see how Adrian accepts that information. That is one of my favorite scenes, just because of the effect, and because it also shows you that, Rocky is finally being honest. Like, he doesn't have to be macho guy. Like, he's being honest with her and in the evolution of their relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's all those little scenes like that kind of, that you develop the affinity for Rocky. And, I think that was a big part of, what Stallone said about this film. It was about, like, showing that he kind of said, drew parallel to himself, and that, like, people only really wanted him to play, tough guy roles, play like muggers and gangsters.
Palookas.
So, yeah. And, it's about, like, the film parallels that in it. It's showing that there is a more depth to him, and yeah, I think that's a great illustration of that.
So the next one is when Mick comes up. Mick has to eat some crow here, right? But he's not doing it in a way where he's asking for Rocky's forgiveness. He has just, he's hurt Rocky's feelings by taking his locker away. And now Rocky gets this opportunity, and Mick looks like an absolute hypocrite to now come to Rocky's door and say, look, I can train you. I can show you all of these things. You had so much potential. You even remind me of Rocky Marciano. Like, come on, Mick. Like, if he really reminded you of Rocky Marciano, you would have forced him to kind of change his lifestyle a little bit. But anyways, Mick has got to convince Rocky to open his eyes to coming back to Mickey and letting Mickey kind of run the show, because he's also, while there's something in it for Mick, right? He's never had someone get a shot. So it's almost like Mick himself is reliving an opportunity that he never got. And he even talks about this story of where he had a fantastic knockout, but it was overshadowed by Firpo and Dempsey, the crazy, wild, historic fight that, I like that little tidbit of Mickey fighting on the undercard of Firpo and Dempsey. And then, but he can't eat crow. He's a little too proud to just apologize to Rocky. All Rocky wants is an apology. And Mick is not apologizing. Mick's like, look, I can train you. I can make sure that I keep you safe. And Rocky's mad. He doesn't want to look at Mick in the face. He's frustrated. He's sad. He's emotional. And he says, and Mick finally says, well, if you wanted the opportunity, why didn't you just ask me? And Rocky's saying, I asked you, but you didn't have time for me. And so Mick is at this point where he's like, I am in the wrong here, but I don't know what else I can do to convince this guy. So he leaves, and Rocky has to kind of verbally go through this moment of running things through his head, all of the frustrations he's ever had with being overlooked. Now it's about his house, right? Mick never said one thing about his house. And Rocky's like, oh, now you're leaving. Why? Because does my house stink? Like, my house stinks, right, Mick? I stink, my house stinks. That's how you feel about me.
My house stink? That's right, it stinks! I ain't have no favors from you! Don't float around me! Talk about your pride. What about my pride, Mick? At least you had a pride! I ain't had no pride, I ain't had nothing. Legs are going, everything is going, no one's getting them nothing. Guy comes up, offers me a fight. Big deal, wanna fight the fight? Yeah, I'll fight the big fight. I wouldn't want to fight that big fight that was gonna happen to me. I'm gonna get that! I'm gonna get that! And you want to be ringside and see it? Do you? You want to help me out? Huh? Do you want to see me get my face kicked in? Legs ain't working, nothing's working. They go on, fight the chair. Yeah, I'll fight him. My face kicked in.
And Mick didn't say any of those things, but that's how Rocky feels Mick thinks about him. He finally comes to reality, like, okay, he's really going to be the one to protect me here. And he runs out, chases Mick, probably apologizes to him. We don't see the dialogue. We just see him put his arm around him, and then Mick walks and Rocky runs back. Another really great scene. I'll let you talk about that. And then there's a tidbit that I have about that scene as well.
Yeah, I think, this is actually definitely one of the best scenes. This and the scene that follow it. You kind of get the sense from what Mickey's saying is he's seeing that this is his last shot. Rocky's he's really, as he said, pleading with Rocky to let him in on this journey. But he is proud, and Rocky just doesn't want to hear it. When he lets him go out, and then as you said, he just lets fly. He lets everything kind of. All his frustration out, and then when he's got that out of his system, it feels like he's able to build that bridge with Mick. He follows him up the street, and that's a beautiful shot. I love how it's shot from further down. It's almost like you're looking from down the road, from where Rocky's house is. You're looking at them, and you can't hear what they say, but there's some kind of reconciliation there. You see them, shake hands and, put his arm around him and that. And then it's clear that, whatever's happened, it's gone true to Rocky, because the very next scene, he's up at, you see the alarm clock hit at 4 o'clock in the morning. He's getting up, he's going running while the city's still asleep. It's still dark. And, that to me is, that's the beginning of Rocky's journey and his transformation.
Yeah, that is a great scene, and watching him slurp down, was it 5 or 6 eggs in a dirty glass is always sort of like the metaphor of, we see boxing, we see the prize fighters, we see the successful fighters, but what we don't see in the sport of boxing is the 90% of those that don't make it. And so that, this is 1976, but that's kind of the start of it for folks, especially folks like someone who is really just an opponent. That's all Rocky is an opponent. He's not on the marquee. He's the person who gets set up to make other people look good. And so that whole thing of him being, this is where he's coming from. And it's such it'll be, as we get into the next 3 films, really, his life, turns upside down, and it's a different look at the other side of a more successful boxer. Yeah, but those are really good. I think, I don't really have to introduce this scene very much, but Rocky and Paulie are chit chatting at Paulie's meat factory, and Paulie is always joking with Rocky. He's always like needling him about his sister, and he has this weird fascination, which I'm going to ask you about this in a different segment. He has this weird fascination of wanting to know if like Rocky and his sister are like having sex or not. And so Rocky gets so frustrated talking to Paulie, and Paulie gets mad, and Rocky just starts hammering the meat that's hanging in the freezer. It's cold. You can very much see it's cold. His hands are wrapped. He's just gotten off of a run with his dog, and Paulie has just kind of frustrated him to another level, and he just starts hammering the beef there. That is, I think we had mentioned Joe Frazier earlier. I think that's a Joe Frazier thing. Like Joe has mentioned in the past that he had done that before, and maybe that's where Rocky got it from. Like I said, Stallone got it from because he's a boxing historian. But I think that's another scene that just stands out, like a very memorable, maybe more memorable than like best scene. But when I think about this movie, it's one that comes up. Yeah,
and it is. It is something Joe has always claimed that, they got the idea from him, and there are certainly, like Joe did work in a meat factory, and there are certainly photos of him not punching meat, but there's certainly photos of him preparing meat and things like that. But I think what I like about this scene as well is just that, like, it kind of tells you something about the relationship with between Paulie and Rocky, like, because they have this big argument, and then after Rocky's like beat up the meat and he's on his way to leave, Paulie's kind of like, he has some line of like, if you do that to Apollo Creed, they're going to arrest us for murder, and I'll see you again tomorrow. And you're like, yeah, I'll see you again tomorrow.
I love that line.
And it like, they just like, they just had this kind of contentious relationship where, they'll go off on each other, but at the same time, it can blow over in a second, and they're back friends again.
So the last one that I have, and I'll then give you the floor if you have any others. So this is probably my favorite scene, and it's kind of combined with the aftermath of this scene that I'm going to talk about. So Rocky, I can't figure out what time of the night it is. Adrian's already asleep. He's leaving the apartment. He's all dressed up, so he's in his normal sort of outerwear, and he goes to the arena that the fight is going to happen the following day.
I didn't think you were going to say this one, and this is one of my favorite ones too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he goes to the building, and the reason why this scene has always been confusing to me is because there's nobody inside the building except the promoter, and Rocky doesn't know that the promoter's there, or maybe he does, and maybe the promoter is the one who let him in. I have no idea how any of this works, but Rocky looks at the posters in the arena that are hanging down of he and Apollo Creed. Obviously, Apollo Creed, they're actually painted. They're like painted posters. So Creed's perfect. His poster's perfect, and Rocky notices that on his poster, the color of the shorts are flipped around. He's wearing white shorts with red stripe, and on the poster, it's red shorts with white stripes. And so Rocky's, he's looking at this and he's kind of overcome with emotion a little bit. And this is right before he comes to this realization that he can't win. And he looks at the poster and he's kind of just contemplating. And then the promoter comes over and they start talking and Rocky just goes, look, the poster's wrong. Like, I'm actually wearing the colors the opposite way. And the promoter just kind of goes, not that big of a deal, right? And so at that point, Rocky goes, oh my gosh, like, I am not being taken seriously. These people don't think I can win. Why should I even think I can win? Like, and so that's, I think, when he comes to that realization, and then he goes back to the apartment and he has that conversation with Adrian.
Yeah, I've heard two kind of variances on what happened here, in that either, the art department got it wrong and they just had to go with it, or that the original costume was the one that was painted and they changed costumes during the course of the movie, and they just wrote it in as this little funny bit. But yeah, I think it just does such a great job of showing like what an afterthought Rocky is in all of this, and just kind of like, he's like like looking at this promoter just like, you give me absolutely no credit whatsoever, and and then, as you said, I think it's kind of the 1-2 punch of that scene and the scene of then going back to Adrian and going like, okay, look, nobody thinks I can do anything here, but if I can make it the distance with Creed when nobody else has, that will prove something for me.
Yeah, no, it's just very well done. And these are the kind of scenes they will try to do it a little bit in Rocky 2, but in Rocky 3 and Rocky 4, they don't do them in the same way. Movie making has changed. The style of the way that Stallone wants these movies to be is much different. You'll see a little bit of this in the first Creed, where some of these really meaningful things happen just in the dialogue. But yeah, like, this is really the major one where the dialogue and the little subtleties are so powerful for the film. So I'll let you add what you wanted to add.
Okay, I have two other ones that you skipped. One of them is, and it's very iconic scene, is the ice skating scene.
Oh yeah.
And just, there was a lot to that, in that, like, I think originally they were meant to meet on a date in a cafe or something like that, and like they rewrote it and decided to do the ice skating thing, and like then they were planning on having a full ice skating rink with 300 extras or something like that. They didn't have the money to do that, and they ended up just doing it doing the story where it's Thanksgiving evening, the place is closed and Rocky has to kind of bribe your man to let him on the ice, and also then part of it, another part of it was like, Sly was meant to be skating with her, and he couldn't skate, so he's running just awkwardly in his runner as well, and she's not a very good skater, and it's just this kind of awkward scene, and he's saying all the wrong things to her. Like, if Adrian's character, she's very timid, she doesn't, and like the more you learn about her throughout the fight, like or throughout the series, that like she's not into the fighting at all, and he just keeps going on and rambling about like all these injuries he's got and everything, but she still finds it kind of charming because she likes him. Like, I just thought that's an awesome scene.
Well, yeah, and then she asks him multiple times, like, why would you do this? You don't even like it. Why would you do it? And he has to make his own jokes about oh, it's because I can't sing or dance or whatever. But the funny thing that I like about this is Rocky, I don't know why he necessarily trusts Paulie, because Paulie's an absolute con man. But Paulie does bring him over. And he's like, look, you like my sister. I have no idea why you like my sister, but come over, like, whatever. And Rocky's like, okay, well, what does your sister like to do? Oh, she loves to ice skate. And it's just like, she's the worst ice skater. Someone who's probably done it just, once or twice in her life. And, it's just Paulie's way of doing stuff. I always like that part of it too.
Yeah, and the other one is kind of a small scene, and I just like it because of the reality to it, because I think it's something we've seen in boxing a lot of times. It's the scene where Duke is watching Rocky on the TV hitting the meat. And as you said earlier, Duke already is kind of like, I don't really want you to fight this southpaw guy. And he's looking at him and going, champ, you should probably be paying attention to this. And Apollo's mind is absolutely anywhere but like what's actually happening in the ring. He's talking all kind of business dealings and everything like that. And the reason why I just kind of love that is just how many times over the years have you seen that kind of insight from a coach where he knows his guy's mind isn't on the job and the fighter's just not hearing it at all.
Well, and I think what also makes that powerful is if you pair it with the scene of Mickey basically telling Rocky, like, I got to protect you. Like, that's my job, is to protect you, because I didn't have anybody to protect me. And that's literally Duke's job with Apollo is, look, even though you're the best fighter in the world, my job is to protect you, and I'm trying to protect you. And Apollo is so big, right? He is so famous of an athlete. He isn't even worried. He's worried about the business side of this fight. How do I drum up the business to make this as big as possible? And so that just shows you, we see that in real life. We just talked about, the Fabulous Four. Sugar Ray Leonard talked about his own abuse of drugs, and Mike Tyson. We know Mike Tyson, the famous Buster Douglas story. Bobby Brown says that, Mike Tyson's having an orgy the night before the fight. And so, this happens in real life, and this is a real sharp scene.
Andy Ruiz for the second Anthony Joshua fight.
Exactly. And Andy Ruiz didn't have any business not being hungry for that second fight. Come on. But yeah, it just shows you this is the real part of boxing. This is why it's not just a sport, right? This is why we call the website The Fight Game, or the podcast, The Fight Game Media, Fight Game Podcast, because there's a side to boxing that is outside of the ring that is almost more important than actually what happens inside of the ring.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there was one other scene I like, but I'm going to leave that because it's actually during the fight. So we can talk about that in due course.
Okay. All right. So if you had to choose, what is your favorite scene?
I think it's like kind of the 1-2 punch of Rocky and Mick's confrontation back at Rocky's apartment, followed by, that first training scene of, him leaving early in the morning while it's still dark, running while they're delivering the papers down the wet streets. And it culminates with him, running the Rocky steps for the first time. But it's not like, when we see it in the Gonna Fly Now montage later on, where he's like, flying up the steps. It's like he's struggling to make it up these steps, and as I said, it's just like, it's such the first steps on the journey, and the first time he's like, really dedicated himself. You get that picture of like, this is a guy who's finally seeing like, okay, I have one shot to make something of myself, and this is it.
No, I think that is probably the most powerful scene, probably the scene that really sets the tone for the end of the movie. I also, I just love the Jurgens scene with the poster like that. Like that is like the hook for me to be like, oh, you need to like come and kick his butt, But what you said is probably the most powerful of those. So I am fine with that one as well. Okay, so let's talk about quotes now. The dialogue in this movie is probably it's actually better than the dialogue for the next five. but there are memorable pieces of dialogue in every Rocky movie because Sly knows that character so well, and he knows how to set that character up for great punchlines. But in this movie, he's not really trying to do that as much as he would in the rest of the films. You know, the rest of the films sort of becomes like, okay, what's the slogan for the film? Well, it's, you know, it's the next thing that's what Sly wrote to be the slogan of the next films. In this film, it's not like that necessarily, but his character of Rocky is like a walking contradiction in a sense. He doesn't really speak in the way that we would all speak. He doesn't say things in the correct way that they're actually written to be said. So some of those quotes I put here because they make me laugh, because it's the Rocky character not really understanding what the right thing is to say. We all know people like that who they are trying to communicate like a punchline and they say it the wrong way or whatever. And Rocky is very much that person. So my first quote is when he is visiting at the pet shop and he is telling Gloria, the owner of the pet shop, about the turtle food. And so he had practiced reading the turtle food I think it's the night before. I think he wanted to impress Adrian that, you know, that he could read and speak and be smart about something. But he's telling Gloria about the turtle food and why the turtles get it caught in their throats, and he's got to pat him on the back. And so then, you know, Gloria's not really giving him time of day. Adrian's kind of paying attention, but then Gloria forces Adrian to clean out some cages, and Rocky thinks that that's kind of mean because, you know, why does she have to do, you know, the nasty work or the dirty work? And so he grabs the turtle food and he doesn't pay for it. And he's about to leave, and Gloria's like, you have to pay for that. And he doesn't pay for it. And he goes, crime don't pay. You know that, Gloria. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But it pops me every time because he is just this like really doofusy guy who is trying to get smarter, and he's trying to improve himself, but he doesn't really know the right thing to say all the time.
No, that's brilliant. And like I think all those interactions in the pet shop, and I'm just kind of trying to come up with these, like, you can see that he's trying to come up with these little punchlines to impress Adrian all the time, and it's just really charming.
So the next one is from the heavyweight champion of the world. Rocky is at the bar watching Apollo on TV, and Apollo goes, you know, this is a very famous quote. He goes through this whole thing about this fight that he's going to have, and then he gives some advice to some children, which ends up with be a thinker, not a stinker. And he does kind of the smile thing. And it reminds me so much of, you know, in football, back in the day when you would win the Super Bowl and the MVP would always kind of do this thing at the end going, and they would say, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to Disneyland. And so they would pay, you know, they would get paid to do this thing during the Super Bowl. And Apollo is such a master marketer, but at the same time, he's also, you know, he also has this sort of goodwill. He has these sayings for the children, and which make him sort of like the people's champ as well, the everyday champion. So I always loved, you know, you could use that. I'm sure it's been used everywhere. Like in real life, you can use, you know, be a thinker, not a stinker. I always like that one.
One of the things I like about this as well is, you know, you see Apollo on the screen and Rocky's watching him in the bar. And, you know, the barman's kind of like any older dude, you know, he's kind of like, this guy's a clown. Yeah. And Rocky takes Apollo aside. He's like, this guy's a champion. You have to show him respect. And, you know, it just kind of reminds me again of like any person you've seen who's got kind of, you know, a bit of a showman character that comes up in boxing. There's always got to be like, you know, your older crowd, whether it's Ali or it was Nassim Hamed or Floyd Mayweather. There's going to be the older crowd who just thinks this guy's a clown. And, you know, I thought that was interesting, showing just that, like, you know, Rocky had respect for Apollo, and also that, you know, throughout this film, there's not really any rivalry between Apollo and Rocky in this film, because, they're not on the same level. So that it wouldn't make, like, every other film we get in this series, it's kind of a pretty intense rivalry between the two boxers. In this one, just because, like, Apollo is so clearly the A side, it doesn't make sense for this to turn into like this brutal feud with Rocky, because, like, he'd be punching down. So, like, I always like that. There's a kind of an aspect of reality to that.
Well, and in the late 70s, I mean, we're talking about mid to late 70s, we're talking about Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman. There's a reverence for the heavyweight champion of the world that there isn't really in today's sports, because the heavyweight champion of the world is not nearly as famous as he used to be when boxing was much bigger. So I always liked it for that reason too. To Rocky, the heavyweight champion of the world was just as important as being the president of the United States.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, like I think that like, there's a lot of little bits with Apollo like that. I think that he carries this character very well and presents himself as the champion. I think he was definitely the guy to lead this series off with.
Okay, so another of my favorite quotes is when Paulie asks Rocky why he even likes his sister or why they work. And Rocky explains relationships in the goofiest but yet easiest to understand way. And I've sort of used a version of this when, I sort of talk about relationships. And he says, kind of just sheepishly, he's just like, well, she's got gaps, I got gaps, and together we fill gaps. And like, if you think about how relationships work, if you bring a side to the table and the other person brings a side to the table, if you both are sort of like emotionally good at the same thing, but also emotionally not good at the same thing, more than likely it's not going to work. But if you can sort of mold your emotions and the things you bring to the table with the other person, there's a good chance that you can rely on each other for what you need. And so Rocky is saying it in that simplistic of a way. I always thought it was a really great line because it makes complete sense to me, and probably to anybody who's been in a relationship A that didn't fit, and then B went like, oh yeah, this is what I've been looking for the whole time. Like, it really explains that very well.
Yeah, and it's also like, that's a big part of this story. It's about these two misfit characters, finding some common ground. So I think one of the things that I probably didn't appreciate up until this time really is how much of Adrian, like Talia Shire's character, plays into how we view Rocky. I think a lot of kind of what we enjoy about him is kind of gained through those interactions he has with Adrian.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to group these next three quotes together because they are all from Mickey. Mickey has great one-liners. He is a fantastically written character. Burgess Meredith is just like, he's the perfect person to play this role, especially this version of Mickey. The Rocky 3 version of Mickey is a little bit different of a character, but this version of Mickey, like, he just eats up this role. So my three favorite Mick quotes are very simplistic, and there's not really a whole lot of backstory in them. The first one is when he tells Rocky, "Women weaken legs," and to Rocky, he's like, geez, I finally get someone I really like, and now you're telling me. It's almost like he gets the girl and the big fight at the same time, and he's got to figure out how to balance the two. He's got to be so focused on his training, but he doesn't want to alienate Adrian because he wants this relationship to work. And Mick is just like, dude, women weaken legs. I've always loved that line. The second one was when he's finally got Rocky in great shape, at least, as much as great of a shape as you can get in like 5.5 weeks between the fight. He says, you're going to eat lightning and you're going to crap thunder. I just pop for that line every time. And then the last one, of course, I think we're leaning towards this as we talk about the fight, but cut me Mick, right? This is actually Rocky speaking to Mick, but I think, he is so, as we get to the fight, he is so wanting to finish that he's going to have Mickey do a pretty jarring thing to his eye to finish it. And it's just like, cut me, Mick. And Mickey doesn't say that line, but it's very much with him involved. And those three to me are just great one-liners for this film.
Yeah, and for Mickey Rocky interactions, I think my other favorite one is kind of like the one we spoke about when they're back in the apartment, and he's like, "You kind of remind me of The Rock, you got heart like him," and then. And Rocky just kind of looks at him and goes, "Yeah, I got heart, but I ain't got no locker." And it's just such a small thing, but you can tell from his all his dealings, throughout that day, that this locker being taken away from him is stuck in his craw to such a degree, and it was it was something he was just so focused on as a point of conflict. I just thought it was really funny.
All right, the last one that I have, and then you can add some more if you have them. Is it is from Duke, and it is after Apollo gets knocked down in the first round, and he looks at Apollo and he goes, he doesn't know it's a damn show. He thinks it's a damn fight.
He doesn't know it's a damn show. He thinks it's a damn fight. Finish this bum and let's go home.
And it's another, you're snapped into this reality that Rocky's the only one in the audience in that building who thinks he's got a shot in this fight. And if he does win, he's going to shock the world. He is the ultimate underdog, the 1 in a million. And Duke, who's, like you said, he was actually the one, who was trying to get Apollo to pay attention. You want to protect your guy. And he's like, he doesn't know it's a damn show. He thinks it's a damn fight. And that kind of summarizes the entire spectacle of what this is in just that one line.
I guess there's a few other little ones that I could think of, just generally kind of smaller funny comments, but when Adrian and Rocky are back at his apartment, and she's looking to call Paulie, and Rocky's like, I don't have a phone. He just opens the window. It's like, I'll call him, and he's like, hey Paulie, your sister. He just yells at the window, hey Paulie, your sister's at my place. I'll call you back later. I thought that was really funny. There's a few with Apollo which are good. I love when they're talking about what they're going to do at the fight, and he's just like he's gone I'm sentimental, and a lot of other people in this country are sentimental, and it's nothing more they'd like to see than Apollo Creed give a local Philadelphia boy a shot at the greatest title in the world. I thought that was really good and just kind of setting the stage.
Yeah, he's just the ultimate promoter. He's just the ultimate marketer. He's thinking far beyond, and that's partially why he's as good as he is. He has to be really good in the ring, but he's also the master marketer. And make Apollo Creed, if you look at the character of Apollo Creed, he is not only a dynamic athlete and boxer, he's also the smartest guy in the whole movie. He understands the whole game and the business of it better than anybody else.
Yeah, and I think then there's a couple others that we'd already discussed. Paulie's line of that we talked about where when Rocky's punching the beat, and he says, if you do that to Apollo Creed, they'll put you in jail for murder. That's another one of my favorites.
And that symbolizes their relationship, because Rocky can only stay mad at that guy for a few minutes.
And then the last one is obviously the one you mentioned, which is just when he's talking with Adrian, admitting that he can't win the fight, and he's just talking about if I can just go see out that distance, and when the bell goes, if I'm still standing, I'll know that for the first time in my life I wasn't just another bum from the neighborhood. And that's what I like about that scene, that in particular, is just that it changes the goalpost in that you go from okay, this guy doesn't have a chance in this fight. That's not what the goal is for him anymore. It's just if he can put on a good show and show people that they were wrong about him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what is your favorite quote? I'll say mine, and then I'll let you get to yours. I think my favorite quote in the whole thing, and because it's the one that I use when I'm watching boxing a lot, and where you have this, when you have a fight where it's probably a bit one-sided or supposed to be one-sided, not really this pay-per-view marquee, but definitely one where there's a favorite and an underdog. And then the underdog comes to fight. I, on Twitter, immediately go, he doesn't know it's a damn show. He thinks it's a damn fight. I think that's my favorite line in the whole movie.
I think for me, it is that one about, I got hard, but I got no locker. Just because I just love how just kind of, that was just kind of a point for Rocky that, maybe that, he was part of something at that club, and just for taking that locker away, even though it seems like such a small thing to him, I don't know, I think it kind of alienated him from Mick, and brought all the kind of detention they'd had for that last 6 years to a boil. Well,
I mean, it's the sickest burn that you could give the guy, because Mick is trying to charm him, and he's trying to use this, use his Jedi mind tricks, and Rocky's just like, no, dude, you can't do that. You can't come in here. How dare you? That is a great moment. Okay, so let's talk about, and this is such a big part of Rocky, but it actually becomes a much bigger part of Rocky in the next 3 Rocky movies. But it's the training montage and the fight scene and the music being used during them, because Rocky is an inspirational thing. You even see fighters in the UFC today come out to Rocky, any music related to Rocky. And this film, because it is it is a film, and it is not what Rocky 4 becomes, which is just this long music video, or even Rocky 3 has a lot of MTV music video moments. This is a little bit more subdued. You already mentioned, just the symbolism of Rocky not being able to make it all the way up the steps in his first run. And that kind of proves to him that he's got a lot of work to do. But the actual montage in this movie is pretty short, and it doesn't actually become kind of the marquee thing that it does until the next movie, but it is still pretty important to the overall film. And I guess what I like about it is it's just very simplistic. Rocky is not doing a lot of heavy weightlifting in this movie. He's doing normal boxing stuff. He's doing running. He's doing speed bag. He's not even really hitting a heavy bag in this movie. But the one thing that stands out to me, because I think Stallone was like, okay, you already mentioned this. We don't have a ton of budget. What can I do to make it look like I am a really good athlete? And he busts out these jumping one-arm push-ups. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do one-arm push-ups. They are really, really hard. I've been able to do them once in my entire life. But B, you're not super stable in them. So when I see him doing these jumping push-ups, all I'm thinking of is this dude is tearing muscles left and right in his chest. And I think he actually does get hurt from doing these push-ups because he overdoes it. But the music and this style of training, I think was really fun to watch. But the montage in of itself will not even become sort of the nitty-gritty build up to the fight as it would in the next 3 films.
One of the things I don't think this film gets enough credit for is just what a beautiful looking film it is. There is some absolutely tremendous shots during this montage, I think. I just don't really think people really talk about Rocky as being this great looking film. But also, I think, this is a scene that you said that it's not as big as it was become, but I think it grew and grew and grew from what it was initially intended.
Mm-hmm.
From the story I heard was they would just drive around in the van and they'd see some interesting spot that they could film, and they'd kick Sly out, go get running, and they'd record it, and that's how they have that great shot of him running by the ship with the ship in the background, or where he's running with the bricks in either hand, and the train is going by up above him. They got all these just great shots, and I believe they went back to Bill Conti a few times and were like, okay, we need you to lengthen this song a little bit. You need to lengthen this song a little bit, and okay, can you add some lyrics? And it just became this bigger and a bit bigger thing, which turned into gonna fly now. And part of the reason why they were doing that was because, as you said, the athleticism from Stallone goes up and up and up, and what we'd already seen in the film was he was struggling, hauling ass up these steps the first time he did it. And the idea was to present in the montage these exercises. You're seeing him move from strength to strength to strength, that what he's doing at the end of the montage he wouldn't have been able to do at the start of it, but you're seeing as he's progressing and he's progressing and progressing, and it's taking on that journey as he's getting fighting fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have the fight, which I will talk a little bit about in my questions to you and in my pet peeves. There's some things about this fight that are a little interesting, but the fight in of itself, obviously, it builds great drama. You start with the uppercut knockdown of Creed, and that's just shocking. It's so jarring even when you watch it, several times, knowing that the champ is going to get knocked out or knocked down. And, because Rocky's kind of in there, and he's not used to fighting someone with that type of slick movement. And he looks like he has two left feet, but Apollo just kind of leaves himself wide open to this uppercut, and he just goes down. That sets the tone. And so you as a viewer, you're like, okay, maybe he does have a chance to win here. And they spend the rest of, there's a couple of moments where Rocky does get an upper hand, or he lands a body shot, but it's not again until the 14th round where Rocky starts to do well again. So it from what the unknown of the rounds that we miss, it seems like from rounds 2 through 14, Rocky just takes a beating and he keeps coming back. And then he finally, he has some really good moments at the end of 14. And then in 15, he looks like he's about ready to put Creed down and just runs out of time.
What I love about this is, we already talked about them moving the goalposts to making this kind of a moral victory for, that was the goal for Rocky going in. And they switched that back on its head again, as you said, in that first round knockdown. Because you're just watching the fight, and Rocky's really, Apollo's not taking him seriously at all, and Rocky can't get near him for those first couple of minutes, and you're thinking, oh, he's really out of his depth. And then, he stuns him with this big shot and puts him over, and you're like, the first time you watch it, you're like, oh, wait, this film is called Rocky. Of course the hero is going to win, So it switches you back up into that, to that mindset of, oh, no, maybe he is going to win it. And then when they pull it back away from you again, and then, the battle returns to what it was initially. It was like, oh, can he get over the line and make the final bell? A couple of things on this. The first is that knockdown. Sly had mentioned that the inspiration for where he, the first spark of an idea for where this film came from was Wepner Ali, and that knockdown to me very influenced by the Wepner knockdown of Ali. Do you think that?
Well, Stallone, very early, especially when he's describing the movie to the media, he really goes into heavy detail about that fight and about why it was influential to him because of that knockdown. Because, he even overdoes it. Wepner obviously was not a great contender, but he did have a decent career. But the way that Stallone describes Wepner in his telling of the inspiration of the movie is this guy's no, zero chance, like just terrible fighter. And so he even overplays that a little bit. Now, obviously, Wepner's not in Ali's class, but at the same time, he was probably a better fighter than actual Rocky Balboa was portrayed to be. So, I would imagine it has to be because just, the way that Stallone describes that knockdown. I think he's even said differently in different stories. I think the first story that I heard was he was in the was in a movie theater. He watched that fight, and I think then maybe it got to like he was there live or something. I don't know. I don't really know because Stallone's a great storyteller too. But yeah, like that just that moment, and he said the silence that you heard and everything. So I would assume so that's definitely
it's just the way Apollo goes down. Kind of, it's very reminiscent of how Ali goes down. And yet I that's the other thing. Like the actors choreographed that fight. They were working with somebody initially, like a guy who was a specialist in doing boxing scenes, and I think what Stallone said was that he wanted Apollo to come out and throw 4 right hands straight away, and your man was like, that wouldn't make sense, no one would do that. He's like, yeah, but it does in this context because Apollo has no regard for Rocky type of thing. It's just like, no, I'm not doing that. And so they fired your man. And then the two guys just like went home and, practiced this fight. Like, Stallone wrote out this fight and just practiced it over and over.
He said it was like 9 pages of choreography or something like that.
Yeah. And I've heard Carl Weathers, who played Apollo, say like, they spent 8 hours in the ring at a time. And, I've also heard Stallone say they were just mining like 70 years worth of fight footage. They're just going through like Joe Louis fights, Rocky Marciano fights, and just trying to steal little bits from here and there and mash it up into this 10-minute fight montage. But the other thing is what they do in this fight is they show us the first 2 rounds kind of like they're full rounds, and then it moves into, we hear the Going the Distance song from the Rocky soundtrack, and we get highlights, and that's kind of the format these fights take for the rest of the film. So that's kind of set down here as well.
Yeah, and then the music, the fight. I'll have some pet peeves, like I said, in a little bit about them. But overall, I know the one thing I was going to mention. Stallone talks about pulling punches and how you have to punch in when you're doing a scene like this, and how it's actually kind of hard to pull a punch. And this kind of goes back to pro wrestling, how they pull punches. But he was saying that in order for Carl Weathers to be Creed, like he had to juice himself up so much that he actually, he was thinking that he was the heavyweight champion of the world. So when they're getting in and they're doing stuff, like he's like tagging Stallone in the head with jabs, and Stallone's like, okay, dude, like I'm the one who wrote this character for you. Like you can't, you gotta pull back a little bit here. Like, don't get too carried away. But I just thought that was amazing. Cause like, if you're going to become Apollo Creed, like you have to become Apollo Creed. And that's just a great little tidbit about the fight scenes.
And yeah, the other scene I was mentioning earlier that I liked, which was during this fight, is, it's in the 14th round where Rocky gets put down, like he's showed a ton of guts and heart, and he gets put down by Apollo near the end of the round. And Mick is telling him to, stay down. And Adrian just enters the arena there just as Rocky's getting up and beats the count just at 8 or 9. And Apollo then just has this look of like, he's seen a ghost, like he's just completely forlorn that Rocky was able to beat the count. Like that's another of my very favorite bits in this whole series.